Krajco was of the first survivors who talked about narcissistic abuse under her real name. She died unexpectedly in her home 2008. She was 56 years old. I suspect the narc hive mind was behind her death. In her book, What Makes Narcissists Tick, Krajco says, the con artist. Narcissists abuse for the power rush they get from vaunting themselves on others. It's the strongest support for their grandiose delusions. They can't get enough of this pain-killing drug. The maximum high, of course, is an absolute power, which is absolute control. What's that? Absolute power is the total conquest of another's will. Your will, not theirs, controls him or her. In other words, the victim becomes an executioner of your will, like a hand or foot of yours. It's akin to the mythical notion of possession of another by a demonic spirit. There's but one way to demonstrate absolute power: break a person so utterly that he delivers himself up entirely for you to abuse so as to suffer maximum impact for your pleasure. 4. Anyone you can make offer themselves to be your punching bag, and in a way that maximizes your enjoyment by maximizing his suffering. Anyone you have that much control over, you own and you have absolute power over, because that person no longer has the will of their own. He has been degraded to nothing and ceased to exist as a person. You possess him. He is an object that exists for your sake. Yes, this is the nightmare of the criminal psychopath. But it may surprise you to know that it is also the nightmare of the art of torture and former European methods of execution by torture. I wonder who laid awake nights dreaming up these sick spectacles, but every detail was designed to do this to the victim. The process was called reduction to a state of victimhood for penal slavery. The prisoner was called the victim. His executioner was called the victor, and the executioner of the victim as in the operator of a machine. By devious methods at every turn, the victim was forced to offer himself for abuse or made to look like he was offering himself for abuse. This is why, for example, the condemned had to actually pay his executioner to gibbet and torture him to death. What if he refused? Would you dare make your executioning mad at you? In other words, everything was designed to make the victim bend over for it. Which is the sin of Sodom, but both church and state let that slip their minds. Our forefathers were so outraged that they put the right to pursue happiness up front in our charters of freedom. Which is why no one ever had to kneel down and put their head on a chopping block here. It may also surprise you to know that professional con artists do the same thing to their victims in a non-physical way. They are every bit as sadistic as the violently criminal psychopath. In fact, a con artist's abuse penetrates to a deeper level. In either case, however, the high the abuser gets is extremely addictive, creating a serial offender. Narcissists are con artists in more ways than one might think. The bright ones may move on to criminal con artistry or become serial bullies in the workplace, often using the havoc they cause as a smokescreen for ripping off the cookie jar while they're at it. Essence of con artistry. We often think of a con artist as just someone who puts on a good act, someone who fools people into thinking well of them and trusting them. Like a charlatan. This is more or less true. But a con artist's act isn't all that good. It shouldn't fool people. The art is in the power to manipulate. 202. Con artists are wizards of human nature, because they are cynics, so they see what moves us better than we do. The intelligent ones are actually masters of mind control. Con artist is short for confidence artist. A confidence artist defrauds people by suckering them to gain their confidence so that they put an inordinate amount of trust in him. When we hear the term con artist, we usually think of the typical street con artist who sells the Brooklyn Bridge or property in Florida sight unseen. But not all con artists are primarily after money. Some, for example, are false messiahs or cult leaders. And not all work the street. Some are administrators and executives. To understand con artistry is to be immune to it. A con artist works his magic by violating relationships. What's a relationship? A relationship is a bond between two parties. Only two parties, never more than two. The relationship may be intimate or distant or anything between. There is an appropriate amount of confidence associated with any relationship. The more intimate the relationship, the more confidence we have in the other party. The word confidence comes from the Latin word for faith, which originally meant good faith equals sincerity, honesty, or honor. Confidence is simply a measure of how certain we are of the good faith of the other party to the relationship. We believe those we have confidence in. In other words, they have credibility in our eyes. The more confidence we have in a relationship, the more trust we invest in it, and the more trust we have on account in it. Loose use, or deliberate misuse, of the word adulterated its meaning to belief. A con artist comes between the two parties in a relationship to gain unwarranted confidence that is rightly due only to a legitimate party to that relationship. Embezzle the trust on account in the relationship. The trick to understanding con artistry is realizing that there are many kinds of relationships, not just those between two people. A relationship can exist between any two entities, one or both of which could be a collective entity, such as a whole nation of people. The relationship a con artist violates could be the relationship between a person and an institution, such as his bank. It could be the relationship between a people and their government or their deity. It can even be the relationship between a fool and his money. Indeed, your typical street con artist always ultimately comes between a fool and his money. Hence the patented con artist motto, "A fool and his money are easily parted." But there are even more intimate relationships. There is likewise a relationship between a person and his or her word, or between a person and his or herself. Fidelity, or faithfulness, is simply being true to the other party to that relationship. Hence the terms marital fidelity, being true to oneself. Treason or betrayal is a breach of that contract. Bank examiner con. The con artist waits outside a bank, looking for a sourpuss, because there is a high probability that such a person likes to think ill of others. On seeing one, the con artist approaches and poses as a law enforcement officer investigating a certain teller in the bank. He asks sourpuss to help by making withdrawals in an effort to get the goods on the teller. Carrots are his bait. The prey has eyes for nothing but, so he is blind to all the signs of bad faith and what the con artist does. One carrot is the juicy lie about the bank teller stealing money. This plays the teeter-totter game, making the mark feel good about himself and getting to abhor someone else's conduct. Another carrot is the opportunity to be viewed as a good person, even a hero, for helping the phony bank examiner catch a crook. The mark imagines his name in the headlines for this. The mark who goes for carrots alone is pretty cheap though. Most require stick too. So, if the mark does not immediately take the bait, the con artist shows disapproval of him as, perhaps, not the good person he was thought to be. The next thing you know, the mark has put the confidence he should have in the legitimate law enforcement authorities into this total stranger. The confidence he had in the bank teller, whom he has known for years, has suddenly vanished, on hearing this tall tale from a total stranger. You can see why con artists feel that their marks deserve what they get. They don't, of course, but it does make you shake your head. People are that eager to believe bad things about others and that fearful of some total stranger's disapproval that they will do something this foolish just to please that total stranger. So, the con artist has violated the relationship between the mark and the bank teller. The next thing you know, the mark is withdrawing money from his account and giving it to this stranger. The scheme would be dangerous if there were any chance the mark would contact the police or FBI about this bogus investigation. But the mark obeys the con artist's orders to keep this affair a secret between the two of them. The con artist has thus violated the relationship between the mark and legitimate law enforcement, cutting the line of communication between them. He has also embezzled the very high level of trust in that account. By the time the mark realizes that he is being robbed, he is so ashamed of both his foolishness and the unsavory bait he jumped at that another deadly sin, pride, makes him, the victim, cover up the crime. Is that not being his own worst enemy? What's more, this happens early on, long before the con artist has finished bleeding the mark's life savings dry. Banks suspect foul play when huge withdrawals are made for no apparent reason, rather than suffer the humiliation of going to the police and explaining how he's been had. The mark goes into denial so deep one must see it to believe it. If that is not the con artist exercising mind control, nothing is. And so, By covering up a crime in progress, the victim surrenders himself to it. In other words, he delivers himself up entirely for abuse so as to suffer maximum impact for the con artist's pleasure. Sound familiar? 262. Moral rape, making the mark bend over for it like that is the exercise of absolute power over him. What more could the con artist ask? Thus, the mark betrays himself. So, the con artist has violated two more relationships. He has not only come between a fool and his money, but also between a fool and his very self. All con schemes work essentially the same way. The con artist tempts one of the 7 deadly sins in the mark, often greed, lust, or envy. Everybody wants something for nothing, and con artists exploit that. Then the shamed victim covers up the crime in progress. So, the con artist gradually sucks him dry like a spider that paralyzes its victim and slowly sucks at its innards. The con artist is the cruelest criminal. Indeed, con artists are notorious for becoming sadistic. They get hooked on the heady, narcissistic rush they get from going through people like Godzilla, and the experience of this power becomes more important to them than the money. Law enforcement officials who deal with them characterize them as just plain evil. Whether they start that way or not, they must surely become malignant. To do this to someone, con artists must rationalize by viewing the mark as deserving it and as contemptible. They must make light of his agony and laugh at it. In other words, con artists must be devoid of humanity, or empathy. To justify himself, a con artist may even view himself as a tester of faith, that is, a tester of the faith in the mark's relationships to determine whether it is bona fide, and the appointed punisher of any mark who flunks. For example, I know of one who pointedly told mysterious allegories in which he always figured himself as some sort of bringer of things to light about people. His marks included many who spoke Latin. Latin for the light bringer is Lucifer. Not funny, eh? What mistakes did Sourpuss make? His first mistake was being a sourpuss who jumps at the chance to think ill of people. That is spiritual envy. His second mistake was letting the con artist between him and that teller, whom he had known for years. People we know, we have reasons to trust; strangers, we don't. That is common sense. The mere word of a stranger should not have made him believe she was committing a crime. His greasy hands betrayed her, because he disregarded everything he knew about her conduct to believe this good name-slaying story about her. It's hard to sympathize with someone who doesn't know that he should value his own first-hand knowledge of a person far more than the mere word of any third party, let alone a stranger. His third mistake was letting a stranger come between him and a whole institution, legitimate law enforcement authority. Being told not to discuss this matter at police or FBI headquarters or with any other law enforcement official should have set off blaring alarm bells. His worst mistake was being too proud to face facts and save himself. Thus he broke faith with his very self. The mark let the con artist interlope in, adulterate, the following relationships. Between him and the teller. Between him and law enforcement. Between him and his money. Between him and his self.